for the average Joe Schmo who just wants to know what the hell Foundry does, all they need to understand is companies have data. Foundry uses AI to make sense of it.
You said it in one sentence, and Karp takes 30 minutes to get that same thought out.
I like that.
I don't know if I love that.
Here is the question, right? Okay, with a company that's so technical, what value does Karp add in that position that, say, someone who can explain the tech, but maybe it isn't the most poetic words?
I was listening to you guys last night, and I was like, I think you were off on this in your analysis. It's so technical that, and this goes back to my journey with my startup, you need philosophy to get people to care. Like, why else would the Palantir have this thriving community of people on YouTube for an AI-based enterprise software?
I'll make the case that if that tech is so good, they don't need retail investors. They don't need people making YouTube about it. Cathie Wood sold 35 million shares. What do you need retail for? Why do you need to create this community around Palantir?
You're essentially asking, if the software is so good, why aren't more people buying it? Why institutional investors, right?
No, I'm saying why.
No, that's a good question.
My question is, why do you need a guy like Karp who specifically appeals to the retail investor, say, when the retail investor is not going to make a dent?
Just to follow up with you, Carlos, basically, if you go to the government, if this is their main thing, hey guys, we can catch terrorists, we've already done it, buy more of our software. That's it. Everybody who's legitimately buying the software, they already know what they're getting. They don't need Karp to philosophize, if I'm saying that correct, with them.
Cathie Woods bought Palantir on the strong fundamentals and understanding where the company's going, having nothing to do with, I think, what Karp philosophically says about the company.
I don't get what the downside to your question is, because you're like, all right, if he's speaking of philosophically for retail, why does he need to do that? My question is, why not? If he knows, and Palantir knows, that the Tesla community was, or any cult-like stock community was able to get behind a mission, they're not stupid. Peter's not stupid. They're like, all right, let's create that mission, even if it's just marketing, even if it's good marketing. And then you've got an evangelist that can create that narrative. So to me, it's like, there is zero downside. Maybe to you, he's not clear, but I think he's very clear outside of the ums and uhs and and I don't think those, the jitters, they get me excited. When he drops the F-bomb.
No, that gets me excited too. It does. I
When he says this is effing cool, that's why we're stealing engineers from Google, I get excited. So I think there's no downside for him being super philosophical and mission oriented. The second question is, well, why aren't institutions just buying the if it's the best thing in the world? Sean, he's the former IBM employee that I interviewed. He just answered this question really well on a podcast he was on today. I'll send it to you guys. And he's in the data industry. He's in selling this software to C-suite executives. His argument is like, look, IT infrastructure is not an easy sell, especially when you've got a lot of political stuff within an institution that's ranging from how they actually transform their entire institution into a data-driven new decade going into the 2030s. That takes time to be able to sell. That takes time to be able to get done. And institutions are not going to load up if you only have 34 net new customers in Q4 2021. I think we've got to be a little bit more patient, see if they can modularize, see if they can scale, and then the institutional buying is going to come immediately. I mean, at the tunes of thousands, once we see that stuff modularizing itself. But I think
the modules that they're building eventually, right now, I also see, this is the problem I also see, that it looks like that they need to send engineers for these big government contracts and big companies to actually go there, as opposed to Snowflake, which is more like a software as a service business where they're not sending you engineers.
Snowflake and Palantir work symbiotically. It's not necessarily competitors. And this has been said many times. And CodeStrap in the interview with him, I spent 10 minutes saying, yo, is Snowflake a competitor? He's like, no. So Snowflake is a data application layer that hosts the data and like stores the data in interchangeable different modular applications for a company. I know that's really esoteric stuff, but basically they manage the data. Palantir is an AI ML infrastructure that makes sense of the data. And in the coming century, this is why they keep saying Foundry is going to be what AWS was for developers last decade. AWS transformed the world because instead of physical servers, everything's in the cloud. Well, now that things are in the cloud, how do you get actionable insights from that data? Snowflake is not doing that, which is why it's out of the box software. Because if it could give you actionable insights using AI and ML, where there's an 85% failure rate when it comes to making sense of data, then it can't be out of the box. Like there's no way it could be out of the box, which is why you require the forward deployed engineers. That's why Snowflake has thousands of customers, Palantir has 300. Now the question, the multi-$100 billion question is, can they get AI, ML, ops infrastructure that works with Databricks and Snowflakes to become modularized to the point where you don't need an engineer? Out of the box AI, ML, ops. That's what they're working on. And that's why I'm like, I need to buy more shares.
Is that Foundry?
Those are the modules of Foundry. But yes, that is Foundry writ large. If they can make it outside of the box, you open up your Foundry, and there's demos of literally them integrated with Snowflake and all this stuff, of you just integrate, you load up your data, now you're getting insights immediately, you know how to make sense of it, all that stuff. You're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar TAM in multiple different industries that Palantir could legitimately, you could say at least 10x, if not 20x. But that's why they integrate with Snowflake and Databricks, which is why they're not necessarily competitors. By the way, Snowflake, 10x so Snowflake is 90 billion to 900 billion. $250 stock to become what, $2,500 stock. I do not see that bull case versus $11 to $100.
That business model where they send people on site, I don't know if you're seeing that as a negative catalyst.
I'm saying definitely as a negative, because he's saying eventually they'll get to the AWS model where they don't need to send engineers.
You have to build that thriving developer community where the developers are the evangelists in their companies to get Foundry implemented.
If I'm investing in the company, I would rather have that model, because once you're ingrained in there and you're in the offices and your gear is written for them, you never lose that customer.
Their net dollar retention is 143%.
By the way, Snowflake's retention was also in the 100 plus.
I don't remember. Snowflake, if you look at their filings, they spend more on sales and marketing than they do on. I mean, that's the difference here. You've got a company with a revolutionary product that actually sells on product. They suck at sales, but they're getting better at it, versus buying a company that has to buy Super Bowl ads. Snowflake's a great company.
No, I'm saying it's the model. It's the model of that. Right. And it's something
spending the money.
Right. Why are you spending more money advertising when they should go into the product? If anything, that's something you learn from Elon Musk. $0 advertising. All the money goes in the product. The product speaks for itself.
I do like that part of it.
Snowflake went through Warren Buffett. They didn't go through the retail community. Snowflake didn't make some beautiful retail mission. They went through Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, Warren Buffett got his billions, but it's not going to grow. I'm not buying that at 250. You're crazy. Like,
no. Yes, that's a different discussion that it's overvalued. At this point, even I would say Palantir is the easier buy in terms of even making a double. Forget about making a 10x. Just if you want a double, Palantir is the company to buy. We're just discussing, like, is this a niche model that they can't scale? That's what I was getting to.
Well, hopefully it is, right? And that's the risk. That's the $25,000 bet. It's like, are they going to be able to figure out how to do that? I just think you don't bet against, and that's where it gets the subjective. You bet against Karp and Thiel. Do you bet against their engineers? Are you actually doing due diligence to see how they're building a developer community? Are you actually talking to the CodeStrap is an engineer, right? And that's why I think his valuable insights. It's like, this guy doesn't have a political agenda. He runs a startup with 400 engineers, and he's trying to figure out, how do we manage building this technical enterprise? And he's like, wait, Foundry is doing it for me. The rest of the world needs to know about this. It's good he's making content. But that's the question. Can they become that AWS? If they do, we're going to go to the moon. If they don't, then we don't.
I've seen a lot of beef with Alex and Facebook and Google. Can you give a little background as to what's the beef there? What's his position? What's Facebook's position? And who's right?
It's so weird because it's not even Alex. It's more so Peter. Peter had a debate with Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, former CEO, in 2012, if you guys have ever seen it. And Peter, they were on CNN, and Peter was just like, you guys have so much money from selling ads, you don't know how to innovate. And Eric Schmidt, the CEO at the time, he was like, you're just silly. And he was like, no, you guys don't innovate. And he was kind of right. I mean, Google really hasn't innovated since then. They're 95% of the revenue still from ads.
Yeah.
So, and it's contradictory because Peter's like, he was the first check into Facebook. So it's like, but you're like, so the whole thing is, I believe, and I don't agree with Karp on this actually, that they think centralized entities that harness data to sell advertising is the most evil thing in the world. Not evil in a sense, it's more so they want to be contrarian, and they believe if software is the moat for a technology company, selling ads through personalized data is not the moat you want to go into. Given that's why when you said about privacy, I don't get it, because everyone who's concerned about privacy should be afraid of Facebook and Google, like legitimately, if you really care that much about your data. Palantir is the guys who get blamed for the privacy stuff, and they're like, wait a second, these are the bad guys. We're not selling your data. We're not monetizing it to sell you more t-shirts. Like, we are literally building stuff that is protecting freedom of speech. That's our stuff, modernizing the enterprise so businesses could have logistics when a pandemic happened. That stuff is the ESG model of Palantir, but they're getting blamed for the privacy stuff, which is why they need to do better marketing on that stuff. So that's their beef with Facebook and Google. Now, I disagree because I think Facebook and Google are providing a valuable service to the world in advertising, but I think this is part of marketing. That shareholder letter it looked like a fucking scripture Bible or something. That whole thing to me is two levels. Number one, that is explicitly talking to engineers. They're like, hey, engineers, you work at Facebook. And I have a friend, by the way, who's a subscriber. He works at Facebook. He just interviewed for a Palantir position. And I asked him why. I had a whole call with him. He was like, bro, it's just like the mission is great. Like it's just so amazing. And I'm like, so this shareholder letter, that Facebook engineer is reading. Second of all, this is part of the narrative of philosophy. And that's why I'm so compelled to them. If they can build this idea that Facebook and Google should not be harnessing your data to sell it for ads that you get none of the upside with, unless YouTube, because you get 55% of that. Then what could a technology company look like that doesn't do that stuff, but could have more societal value? How could girls not kill themselves if Palantir was the operating system for the world instead of Instagram?
How a deviant philosopher built Palantir, a CIA-funded data mining juggernaut. I guess we're not discussing that. And we went over some of this. I just want to be clear that Palantir is not the good boy you are making them out to be.
I've read these articles. I'm going to do more videos on them. So like there's.
Do you know Palantir? Because Palantir knows you. Palantir started right here. Palantir lives the reality of its customers, the NSA, the FBI, and the CIA, an early investor through its In-Q-Tel venture fund, along with an alphabet soup of other U.S. counterterrorism and military agencies. And I can keep going, but the point is that they didn't have this strawberries and cream beginning that people love.
But that's my point. How is that not ESG? You're stopping people from dying. That's what I don't get about the narrative. So when people like you like bring up this thing, and I could tell it's a little negative, and I understand that, I don't get it. Because I'm like, you're a logical thinker. You don't think Facebook is immoral. So how do you think counterterrorism is immoral?
No, I actually don't think that's immoral. I don't think that part's immoral.
The headline was, they're using Palantir software to make your data as searchable as a hotel reservation website.
But my point is that that's also a misleading headline, because that technology is protecting data as much as it's giving exposure to it. Look, this is the thing we have to realize. The government has to spy on us to stop terrorism. It's just that simple. I'm not radical in saying that. In order to counter terrorism, now there's degrees by which how much they do it. But if you act like the government doesn't know stuff about us to make sure bad stuff doesn't happen, then it doesn't make any sense, right? That has to happen. The question is, how much do they go there? And with the Snowden stuff, everything's about to leak. They've done some pretty bad things. To me, and this is what I understand, is Palantir's technology has civil liberties protections in place within the tech so that doesn't get misused. Now, maybe I'm naive saying that. Maybe I've got to do more research. But as of now, that's the story that I'm being sold. That's the story that makes sense from all the research I've done. And if I get a different story, then I'll look at it. But I don't think that's happening at the moment.
I'll make what I think is the case for most people that have a problem with this, right? Giving up some civil liberties for protection. If you don't want this to happen again, you got to give up some civil liberties. Most people are okay with that. If it's something they can see. Oh, I got to go to the airport and take my shoes off to protect it. Okay, fine, no problem. Oh, you want to x-ray my bag? Cool. What people are not cool with is this thing telling you everywhere I am at, you reading my texts, and me not knowing about it. This is the problem I think people have. I think you can handle it one of two ways. You can either limit the company's abilities to do that, but you're also limiting the benefit we get, or have me opting in to having my data generate me money. If I knew Facebook was tracking me, but I'm getting a small dividend based on how important my data was to them, a small sliver, I would probably opt in and be okay with it. I think that's the part that's missing, is that we are the oil that's in the ground and we're not making any money off of it. If you pay for software, that's the product. If you don't pay for software, you are the product.
It all comes down to me and Carlos making money. Okay, if we get paid for our data, we're okay with it.
My friend signed up for it. He got $20 for his.
All right, so okay, here we go. What is this? When people collect, yes, okay, exactly. Make your data your property.
But listen, this is a foundry for builders company that Palantir is partnered with. This, and I did a video on this a while back. They don't get a lot of shine, but if you're talking about like make money for data opt in, this is the solution. This is that potential B2C product that
this is what I think people, if you gave them that option, I think people would be probably even more forthcoming with their data.
The only problem is, Carlos, and even that website you guys can go to later and see how Palantir is working with them and stuff. The problem is data is not valuable unless it's able to be in an ecosystem that is able to be monetized. So it's like, if Facebook could pay you the commission off knowing that you're a Republican so they can target you with conservative ads, then it's valuable. The problem is building out an infrastructure at scale for 3 billion people to pay them a commission to then be able to actually make sense of the data and then make a profit on top of sharing. Like, that's the hard part. But I agree with you. If Palantir could do that type of software and make the next Google, that like a private search engine that sells ads in a nice way, there is a world in which this shareholder letter actually starts to make sense because they're actually digging into the business model.
By the way, it's called DuckDuckGo, just FYI.
Yeah, that's, and Apple should have bought them a while ago.
They should have.
What parts of this like stuck out to you?
Command F the word radical.
He's like, Command F.
Radical one right here.
The decision to act on something, even an approximate principle or actual belief, is a radical one in the corporate world, given the current tendency in public life to eliminate any possibility of provocation and consequently any opportunity for a genuine discourse or original thought. So again, they're saying their ability to be like, hey, we defend Western values and Western freedoms and we believe in civil liberties is so radical because all the social media companies that have the world's attention when it comes to technology companies don't do that explicitly. They don't care about that stuff, given the harnessing of our data. That to me was like, oh, he's going for it.